And we are recording.
Let's see.
Well, shall we go ahead? We're just like a minute away. We could do our cheers. Welcome everybody to Wind Down Wednesday, June
Cheers.
17th.
Fun to see this group. What a great group.
Cheers. Yeah, so welcome everybody. This is the collection of our SI Research Collaborative. And I was trying to figure out how long we've been meeting, but it's been almost 20 years, right?
2002, I think.
2000.
I think it's 2002. It's exactly the
Yes.
date I was coming up with.
So 18 years.
18 years, yeah.
To
18
be
years.
precise. We didn't all have gray hair then. Yeah, but anyway, so, but I think that that's unique in and of itself, that we have known each other and worked together for so many years with a common purpose and an idea about like how do we create the research and materials necessary so that we don't hear that sensory integration has no research. I mean, we've all heard that and tired of hearing about that, but also, well, what did we need to do to create evidence-based practice for sensory integration? So we have an amazing group of people. We have Dr. Sarah Schoen, Dr. Anita Bundy, Dr. Diane Parham, Dr. Zoe Mayu, Dr. Teresa May Benson, Dr. Shelley Lane, and we're missing Dr. Roseanne Schaaf. She wasn't able to make it tonight. We're very sad that we don't have her here. She really wanted to be here. And I wanted to give a shout out to Jane Kumar. That's it. That's all I can do. So, but I thought maybe we'd start. And Diane, I was going to ask you if you wanted to talk about how this group got started, the initial grant, and everything.
Yeah, sure. And I think it was 2002. Lucy Miller really is the person who got this going. And she was, had really for years been working on getting funding for research and sensory integration and getting turned down, not getting funded. And anyway, she finally did get this little grant. It was a little planning grant called an R21 out of our National Institutes of Health. And it was really short term. Now, help me remember, I think it was only 1 or maybe 2 years. It was a short term kind of thing, and it was for planning. And the funding agency pretty much said, really do whatever you want to do, something with children, And so I think originally it was supposed to be preterm infants. I think you were involved with this, Teresa, somehow, some data out of
early development or something.
It was early development, but then they told Lucy, honestly, you could do whatever you want, honestly. But you guys really did actually look at some of your data from clinical practice.
Yes,
around that theme that was supposedly the official theme, of that grant. But it was very nice that they gave Lucy a lot of flexibility and leeway to do what she'd like to get done. So she called a group of us together. It was a smaller group. And what stands out in my mind about that meeting, and it was in the Los Angeles area. It was at the Ayres Clinic at the time. As if I recall, jump in if I get the details wrong or if you remember it differently. Okay, I don't mind that. And anyway, what stands out in my mind about that discussion? We were all at a table, and Lucy was sharing with us these jewels of information about what she'd found out from reviewers who were not funding her projects. It truly was valuable information. Because, once you know what it is you need to fix, you have goals to work towards. And I think looking back now, 18 years at least later, I think it was really spot on. Okay, so here's was the thinking. She said, Okay, first of all, we have to do something about the theory as well as the intervention. So with the theory, it had been strongly recommended by reviewers that work be done on physiological measures related to the theory of sensory integration. And so some of you may know that, yes, indeed, that work started going. A number of groups in different places in the U.S. and which is a really long-term project with physiological measures. I know also Sarah at the Star Institute and has had a similar lab for measuring autonomic responses, specifically of children with sensory modulation difficulties. So now we're using the term sensory reactivity, but the idea was get some data, physiological data, and test the theory and see, are we on the right track? Are we giving the right explanations of why, for example, children might be tactily defensive? Okay, a reactivity problem. Okay, so that was one piece, was physiological measures to test the theory and to develop the theory. And then the next big piece was to look at intervention, that you needed to do really good randomized clinical trials. And one of the major problems in the field of sensory integration had been there's no fidelity measure. There's no way, you don't have any instrument or any tool that you could use to check in an intervention study that the treatment's actually being provided the way it's supposed to be. Okay, so that was another big project then. Okay, so that was, wow, that was probably, I don't know, it was a decade or so. It was about a decade of work, okay, all told, okay. So I started out with all research. Ellen Cohn was here originally. By the way, I want to say the group of researchers, it's not like this is a fixed group. People come and go and they come back, bring a friend. The key is a passion for doing the research and that you really care about this area of research and you really work with others to really compromise. You just want to get this done. You want to push the field further. It's a lot of work, okay? But it is much more fun, I think, with other people than alone. I started out as sort of a loner type, and I've grown to really appreciate how great it is and how much better things seem to be when you're working with somebody else. So that took me a while. So if you're a loner type, just be patient with yourself and give it a try. Try collaborating. You know, you have to compromise sometimes. Everybody's doing that and everybody's committed. It'll work out. You'll work it out. So developing a fidelity measure was a big project that came out of this, and directly because Lucy had told us from this grant, this is what reviewers are saying. Hi from Pakistan, okay. Hi. So fidelity measure. Then once we had the fidelity measure, then we're positioned to really do some nice work with the randomized clinical trials. Okay, so design the study where you've got children who are randomly assigned to an Ayres Sensory Integration intervention or an alternate intervention or no intervention. And we had by then, by the time these were done, actually some of the studies, I think Beth Pfeiffer had done the first one. It was a randomized clinical trial. I believe she started that study before the fidelity measure. The first article that actually presented the different elements of the fidelity measure was published. It was in process. So when she started working on her randomized trial. So that kind of brings us into then that next piece was the goal effectiveness studies and really high level effectiveness studies. So Beth Pfeiffer did one, and then Roseanne Schaaf's was critical. Also, these were very well done, high quality studies. And so now we're just thrilled that sensory integration is recognized as an evidence-based practice according to criteria of a couple of different organizations that are very influential, at least in the US. So, and these are not organizations, these are organizations that serve children with a disability. So it's so nice to be recognized finally on very rigorous criteria that we cut the grade. We have a really strong intervention here. So, something else that Lucy did was she was able to secure, going back to Lucy's vision, so she kind of got us going on these specific projects. Something else she did was she was able to secure funding to actually then fund basic science researchers. And it was, I think, really brilliant. So there are a number of basic science researchers who've contributed to the knowledge base, the theory of sensory integration as well. So that was a really a key project that she took on and has really paid off over the years.
And Diane, just to add to that, because I think really the recognition needs to go to also the Wallace Research Foundation, who was the funder for the scientific work group that really launched a body of literature. And just to also add to what you've said, the original mission relative to the physiology labs as well as to the scientific work group was specifically on hyperreactivity, also known as sensory overresponsivity, not to get into the weeds on that, but but just, so that we know, because it's one subtype and certainly it's important, but it's not covering the range of symptoms that individuals have with sensory integration challenges.
Yeah, well, that's an important point. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it really was focused, and that's why we had the physiological measures. It was really focused on the modulation issues, reactivity issues. And, I'd like to see, for example, vestibular postural issues, vestibular proprioceptive issues. It would be so great to have, randomized trials looking at that group. Actually, that would fall under probably DCD, and it would be so great to look at the distinct issues and also effectiveness of intervention with DCD children who have primarily vestibular proprioceptive difficulties versus, say, somatodyspraxia. So maybe we can get some other researchers to help us with some of that stuff too, because that would be real interesting, I think. And it hasn't been really dealt with yet. So.
That would be an amazing study, Diane. Could happen.
Yeah, it could happen. Yeah.
Never know.
That's how some of these dreams get started. We go, it would be a really good idea. Like, well, I think I could do this piece or this piece. Or you think, oh, nobody's going to do that. Like, well, maybe we could do that. And then the teams start forming and some of the things work out.
So there's some already great takeaways. I'm hearing, I heard, don't be afraid to work with a team, even if you don't always have exactly the same perspective. I think we've learned in this group and in so much of what we do, the diversity of viewpoints and perspectives just brings such a rich collaboration. And that definitely has been the case for I think all of us here. I also heard that it's really important to understand the problem to fix it. I think, Diane, you're bringing up that, it was so important to hear why was funding not forthcoming. And so often, I think we try to solve problems without taking the time to really understand what the problem is. We just throw solutions. I don't know how often I use the word systematic and methodical, but I think it's so important that we take a step back and really understand what an issue is so we can be most effective at solving it.
Mm-hmm. And that's not always easy, to do.
Yeah, one other thing I heard was, well, let's go ahead. I'll bring this other one up later.
I was going to add, because I think one of the unique features, and I mentioned this to Suzanne earlier in the week, was that there were both researchers and clinical experts and clinical educators in our group, and now everybody is a doctor and a researcher. you know, in the early phases, I think that was really important in terms of conceptualizing the problems, as well as what I think is possible in the future, which is a lot of researchers don't have access to clinical populations, which makes the implementation difficult. And a lot of clinicians who really want to be clinician researchers, but don't have the mentors to be able to carry out a study. And the ability to marry those two groups is really a very unique feature, and one that I think made our group extremely successful as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Can I just add something, because I feel so privileged to be here today, because I believe that I represent maybe 80 or 90% of the people that are watching us, and we have sometimes we just have this questions, is that how can we start, you know? And for me, that I work for 9 years in occupational therapy as a clinician, I would love to contribute for research, but I don't know where to start. I don't know, you know, I don't know how to move. And this mentorship is so important. So maybe what I wanted to ask is, do you have any recommendations? What can we do if we are on the clinic, if we have patients, if we have population that we can work with and maybe collaborate? How can we find a mentor? How can we join in this effort to well, to publish and to contribute to the body of evidence?
Well, I was going to say that, you know, I was I sort of always had maybe more than one foot in practice all these many years, still do. And I didn't identify myself as a researcher, certainly when we got started, but I had the experience of trying to contribute to research. Even those studies that Dr. Ayres was working on, you know, okay, we need somebody to go try out the postural praxis items. Well, I could do that. I mean, I could go do that with kids. And so I always felt like I had a little piece, but when we tried, and we certainly did try to collect certain kinds of data, it always fell short. It always felt like a master's level project in terms of a master's degree, which was maybe contributing a little bit, but it didn't have the robust design or the integrity that critics were looking for, like a randomized clinical trial. And what we ended up doing is, you know, back in the day, is we produced some nice little studies, but none of them were enough to move the needle. So I felt like once this group got together and we had the university level professionals, we have people who really understand statistics, we know measurement, and we have the clinical arm. Well, we can go test kids because we've got kids. This marriage to me was really also part of the brilliant design of the group.
And, you know, I think to your question as well, Marco, I would recommend that people in clinical practice, that they read about research tracks that, you know, that are of their interest, and then consider contacting those people who are doing that research if they have a clinical population that might be a match. I know that, you know, Roseanne couldn't be here, but I know she was really thrilled to connect with people in clinical practice, like our friends at Children's Specialized Hospital and now our friends in the Bronx, who were willing to, it's not easy. Doing research is not easy. You have to know that. It's not a simple thing. It's a lot of time that's not paid time. But if you're really passionate about it and you're interested and you're willing to you know, give, I think, and maybe the university people, Anita, Shelley, Diane, maybe you want to add to this, but I think we have found that people in universities who have research programs are open and interested in connecting with clinicians who might have clinical populations.
Yeah, I do want to add on to that a little bit because I want to let you know, actually, I think one of the most important things actually is to be inquisitive, and also to set high standards for yourself in practice. So I want to share with you that when I first practiced as an occupational therapist, at that time in the US, you just needed a bachelor's degree. And I had worked in psychiatry. That's where I started out, child and adolescent and adult. And after 4 years, I was getting a little antsy. I really wanted to grow. I didn't understand research, and our journal was just starting to, publish research articles. And I applied for a master's program at University of Southern California. And in my essay, I was very clear that I was not interested in research. Very clear. Not interested. That my goal was excellence in clinical practice.
We can tell.
So I don't know how to take that, Marco.
No.
Anyway, so in that program, you actually had to do a master's thesis that had a research component. So I thought I'll just get it done and I'll be done. I'll get my degree and go back into practice. And, you do kind of get a little bit hooked, like, well, what will I find out? What's going to happen if I check this out? And so somehow I ended up with with a lot of research involvement, which I've just really loved, but I didn't start out aspiring to that. I just thought it wasn't my thing, So I would say, the research piece is related to excellence in clinical practice because you will think more deeply. It will expand your clinical reasoning skills for sure. And so I would say give it a try, even if you think it's not your thing. And even if you don't go into research and you remain in clinical practice, you can be a fine consumer of research, which is very important for keeping up with changes in the field and making sure that you're doing the best that you can for the clients and patients that you're serving.
Well, and I was going to see if Teresa wants to contribute here. As we mentioned, you and Jane at the OTA Watertown Kumar Center were able to publish the study on your population with prematurity. And from my point of view, and I'm going to let you say that it's because you kept excellent records. Jane had a vision for research and the systematic way that you collected the data. But anyway, maybe you can say, because you've had a lot of clinical research now published, yeah?
Yeah, I was going to say that. I think from a clinical viewpoint, there's a couple of pieces that I think are important. First of all, as a clinician, you need to be thinking about the data that you're collecting on your clientele, so that and how you're storing that data. At OTA, for instance, we just spent thousands of dollars over 5 years scanning all of our clinical records back 30 years.
Wow.
So all of our clinical records there are now digitized. And what that allows, it's in PDF format, but what it does is that allows us better access now. We can go in and say, I want kids of a certain age who have had the SIPT, and we can find them. So I think with digital record keeping today, it's going to be a little easier, but you have to be thinking about how you're setting up your clinical records, and also what kind of data you are collecting on every single client that walks through your door, because you need to have consistency. If you have clients coming in like, oh, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that, you're never going to have a large enough group with the same data to be able to do anything. Whereas if you say every single person who walks in the door does this sensory history and does this family impact questionnaire when they leave, or what have you, then you have consistent data that allows you to do something with. And that has been a big piece of how we've been able to do a lot of our research, is that we've had consistent sensory histories or versions of them. We've had, we have what we call an evaluation completion form that everybody fills out after an eval, regardless of what tests they use. And it allows us to have a synthesis of child performance across all of the areas of sensory integration. Now the clinic is doing Gaskell's on all of the clients every 6 months. So there's a lot of these kinds of things that can be done in a clinical format that makes data collection easier. So things that we've been able to do, for instance, is we were able to go back to our sensory histories. We had almost 1,000 children with sensory integration problems and almost 500 children with autism. And we looked at pre and post and perinatal developmental factors. And we're able to identify risk factors for our kids. You know, that was a pretty amazing study that we were able to do. And Jane, as the clinic owner, had the support for research that she would, you know, yes, okay, you know, this little research assistant to come in for the summer and, you know, do data entry, you know, and so she was able to, you know, a few $1,000s into it to end up getting a paper that is a really highly cited paper at this point. You know, so that's one thing. We were able to use those same developmental sensory histories. We just had a paper published on gravitational insecurity in children using the same sensory histories. We're working on another paper now on adults. And we just are completing a 30 follow-up study, longitudinal follow-up study on our clients. And so we've got some pretty cool data there that we're looking at having. It's really exciting. So anyways, lots of little things like that have really contributed to the papers that we've been able to put out over the years. And also, if you want to do a prospective study, as a clinic person, you have to think small. You know, you're not going to be able to do the big randomized controlled trial, but do you have a particular population that's interesting or unique? Maybe you have a lot of kids with encopresis. Well, you know what? There's lots of questions about that. Or you've got lots of kids with pandas or whatever, you know. You can do a little study looking at what SI looks like, those kids. And that can be really useful information. And those kinds of studies are good ways to get your feet wet in terms of the research programs, you know, and to start making connections. Because if you go to a mentor with a small project, say, you know, we've got this little project we'd like to do, I just need some help with this. A mentor who's busy will be very willing to give you a little bit of time to support you on that little project to start with. And once they see your passion and you're, you know, that you'll follow through and that you'll really do these things and you really want to do this, then they're, okay, let's do something a little bigger the next time. And then we'll do something a little bigger. And then they'll come back and say, oh, I've got something that I'd like to have you help in. And that's the way the snowball rolled and gets bigger.
You've had to develop a lot of skill sets to get to the point where you can actually aggregate your data and produce these peer-reviewed articles. And I'm glad you mentioned prospective, because Anita and Shelley, you've been quiet here, but I have so appreciated interacting with both of you. Shelley, you've managed to get so much in print, and Anita, you've been magical in helping us with the data collection on the easy. So what are your thoughts on all of this? Shelley, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll say just a couple of things about that clinical academic relationship. And one of those is that one of the most challenging things to do as an academician trying to do research is recruitment. And so clinicians who have access to populations are like gold. So if you are in a clinical environment, don't hesitate to contact somebody at the university if they brush you off, they're foolish, because that's where the pairing comes up that Zoe talked about earlier, and I think it's crucial. Everybody has different skill sets that they bring to the table, and I know personally I've benefited hugely from relationships that I've been able to form with clinicians, and I'm still engaged in several projects from some relationships in Australia, and they're not unfolding rapidly, but they are moving forward, and it's, to me, it's one of the most rewarding ways to do research. Anita, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I'm also a big one in terms of clinicians. You know, you guys have lots of creative tools that you use in your clinic. Maybe you've created a little questionnaire on a given topic or something that you have found really clinically viable. You know what? Do some research on that. And, you know, do some of the psychometric testing, reliability testing, or inter-rater testing. Things like that are easy to do. And there are ways to validate the tools that you have and to start bringing that as a way of collecting outcome data, you know, data with other clinicians. And it's a great way to start, you know, again, get feet wet. And then you find university people who are maybe interested in your little tool. I mean, Shelley and I have collaborated on my motor planning maze assessment and my tip. And, you know, that's a great way to get data collected on this great little tool that you developed.
And
you
it
know?
was
and,
so much fun.
Oh, it was fun, yeah. And we got great information. Awesome.
And it went on for 3 years or so.
Yeah,
and
quite a while.
A lot of people and a lot of kids. It was awesome. Yeah. That was a really powerful relationship.
Yeah.
Is a really powerful relationship.
It is. Yeah.
Anita?
Well, I think all the good advice has been offered, but going back to Zoe's point, I think, you know, really follow your heart. And what really interests you the most, read about it, find out the people who are writing those things, contact them. You know, research is fun, but it is really hard work, and it is really easy to make bad decisions. So, you know, work with someone who really does know what they're doing, or sort of knows what they're doing, and you know, work closely with those people, and don't be afraid to make a commitment. So, you know, if you really like it, if you try it out and you really like it, then think about a graduate degree and look for opportunities. Marco, I'm amazed that you're asking that question, given that he's a person who's just grabbed an opportunity that to do some PhD work. So I think that's really important. And, you know, like Diane, I was not a person who wanted to do research. I have exactly that same story to tell about going to Boston and saying to myself, if I could do this without doing a thesis, I'd be there in a heartbeat. But of course, you couldn't do that. And then, you know, the thesis that I did, which, you know, was a zillion years ago, and now it wouldn't even be important work, but it changed my life in, you know, markedly, in just huge ways. And so I think, even as Diane says, even if you think you don't like it, it's not your thing, you might be really surprised at how much you love that. So
you find the right topic and it just grabs you.
But I think
you fall in love with Rosh analysis, Anita.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with falling in love with Rosh.
Yeah, grab you.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's in a way, it's sort of looking for opportunities and taking them when they come up. And, you know, it's knowing what it is that really excites you. And I think the really nice thing about Roche is it tells you so much about your data that other kinds of statistical approaches don't necessarily tell you. And so, you know, I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time. And American OT Association was funding research centers of excellence, and years ago. And I was in Chicago, and so was Ben Wright, who brought Roche to the U.S. And so we were lucky enough to be right.
Somebody's asking, what is Roche? I kind of threw it out there, but
okay.
Just give a little encapsulation.
Yeah, well, I can try to. It's a statistical analysis procedure. Many OTs and healthcare professionals have used Roche to develop assessments. So the AMPS was developed using Roche. My Test of Playfulness was developed using Roche, and many others were developed. The PD was developed strongly using Roche. So it's a statistical analysis procedure that more and more OTs and healthcare professionals are using, and it's a very friendly, lovely way to go. But you do have to work with people who know about Roche. So I think that's the advice: is find somebody who you can work really well with and go for it, and, you know, put your toe in the water, and if you love it, then really make a commitment to it.
And Sarah, I think I might have interrupted you, Sarah, before
it's not about Roche, so I didn't want to.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I kind of jumped in.
No, the thing that I've noticed from what everybody is saying is that it comes down to having a really important question that you want to answer. And I think, you know, as Teresa was explaining, you know, one of the questions might be, what are the characteristics of these individuals who make up a particular population? So, or what are the outcomes from utilizing a particular tool or strategy for intervention? And that question will dictate how you systematically, as Teresa also explained, will put in the measures that will allow you to answer that question. And I think clinicians are in such a beautiful position to be able to ask those questions. We ask questions every minute that we're in a treatment session with a particular client, and then you can think about more broadly expanding that to clients who all present with a similar kind of challenge or symptomatology. And you know, I think that to the extent that clinics can determine what those entry measures are or those outcome measures are, that, you know, to do, even as was described, you know, chart reviews, while they're not the most rigorous design, are still legitimate in terms of presenting information that occurs in a typical daily practice. As long as they're consistent, as Teresa said as well. So that was just the point I wanted to make.
And it also goes into things like, from a clinical perspective, program review. And I know very often clinicians run into the issue of IRBs, institutional review boards, and having access to people who can get them coverage on that. Whereas you can do program reviews of your clinical programs without IRB approval, to look at the data for at least your own PR, your own use, that kind of thing. And then once you kind of have that, you can go and see about, if you want to publish it in a bigger journal, you can look at IRB at that point. But program reviews can also be a good way to get started, because they're really grounded in what you as the clinic want to, what's important for your clinical practice. You know, what do you want to measure about your clinical practice? Oh, we've got this cool group due, and we want to know, do the kids who attend this group make some kind of progress that's important, so that we can advertise that, what have you. Well, then program review can be a great way to look at that. And that's research, you know, but it's very clinically grounded research. Yeah, and it can be a good way to go to an administrator and say, let's do this program review, because that's going to get them something that's meaningful for their program to start with.
One thing that it seems to, so I see from colleagues of mine that sometimes research is, it's like a big monster, scary, you know, it's just like you, you look to that and you're just scared to go in. But as we're talking, and Dr. May-Benson, you're talking about this, you know, not only evidence-based practice, but practice-based evidence, right? And that's very important, but it seems like it starts where, in one point that we were always talking about in this webinar, is like systematic assessment. And that's probably very important to design a study or a research. Do you have any tips on that? How can we as a clinicians like be more systematic?
Well, I just would like to jump in and say, I think one of the things I'm hearing, and it's a theme, is, you know, that you can start small. You don't necessarily have to take on something huge. And I know working with the OTD students, I think one of the things I really see developing with many of the students over time is that it's the process, it's through the process that you really learn skills and methods that will serve you not only in conducting research, but also in clinical practice. And so I think sometimes, like you're saying, Marco, you don't have to think of it as a hugest project. Think of something manageable and know that it's okay to be satisfied with the process, that the actual outcome, you know, it might be great, it might be something really important, but whether it is or not, just going through that kind of systematic way of asking questions and looking for answers will get you somewhere. And if nothing else, it will improve your clinical reasoning and your clinical practice.
I think it's worth, oops, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Anita.
I just think it's really worth emphasizing how important the question is. And the question drives everything. It drives what you do, how you do it. And if you read a really well-constructed journal article, the introduction leads you to the question. And then the method is, here's how I answered the question. And the results are, here's the answer to the question. And then the discussion is, well, here's what it means. And it goes all the way back to the introduction. So the question is so critical. And in my experience of mentoring young researchers, that is the single hardest thing to do, to ask a good question, a small enough question. Everybody wants to answer this gigantic question, and you feel like it won't be important enough unless you ask this huge question, but really you need something very small. And I mean, again, I would just encourage you to work with someone to create a really good question. And what I tell students now is that question, you need to write it on a little card above your computer. And when you're working on a section, you just have to keep thinking, how does this relate to my question? So it is the single biggest thing.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to talk about a little bit, not so articulately as you said, but when I was enumerating the what this group, the SIRC group, has produced, one of the things that really struck me was that we had a question in mind and we had a goal. And I think one of the amazing pieces of this group working together is that every year we came and we established long-term and short-term goals for projects. And we sat down and we had individual projects and we had small group projects and we had whole group projects. And then we would go with our respective sphere of influence, the people working with us in our own area, and we go do our stuff. And I think it was through that short-term and long-term planning that we were able to do some amazing things, that we were able to accomplish some of the things that we've done, which I'd really like to talk about. For example, the special issue of AJOT, 2007, Shelley Lane was the editor. The ASI trademark, I took that on and worked with the Ayres family, and we got a publication in OT practice because we wanted all of OT to think about it. The goal attainment scaling, Malo and May Benson are the primary authors on that. The physiological studies, Lane and Schoen and Reynolds and Schaff, all of you have publications in these areas. The SIP factor analysis, that was Malo and Mulligan and Smith-Rowley. And then the grant submissions, Roseanne Schaff, I just want to give a shout out because I think she's accomplished something nobody else was able to accomplish in getting funding for an RCT and subsequent funding. So, and then we have the intervention manual, and Schaff and Malo published that in 2015. There was another special issue of AJOT, Malo and Miller-Kohanek, on sensory integration measurement. We got all the fidelity publications. Susie Spitzer and Diane took the lead on the early one. Diane and I took the lead on, and she's the first author, of course, on the 2011, and May Benson and I did the 2014 with the support of the group. We didn't do that by ourselves, but you know, with people taking the lead. And then we did the frames of reference chapter. And this was when there was so much terminology out there that wasn't all in sync, and Roseanne and Sarah and those of us worked on that to try to meld it together. So we had a cohesive format, and then we've redone that chapter. And now we have evaluation tools. And of course, Param is a well-known author of the SPM. Schoen is on the SP3D, Mayu, and me and Diane on the easy, and we will have options for assessment tools, more assessment. We need more assessment tools. One doesn't fit everybody. We've been very limited in that. Schoen took the lead on the systematic review. That was huge, huge, really huge. And then we have the brain sciences article, and Lane took the lead on that. So, and there's more coming out. So, I mean, not to overwhelm anybody, but we've got a lot of publications. So I think every other day you send me something like, oh my goodness, you're working on another article. And it's not her alone because you're working in teams, but maybe we can talk about how that happens and what the group's doing in the future. But I do want to say it's because we have a common passion, but also we had a question, like, what is it that's going to help children and families? What is it that's going to help practice? So I don't know if somebody wants to take it from here. Zoe, you're muted.
Well, one of the things I was going to just try to get in somewhere, and maybe this is the place, is since Roseanne isn't here, you know, I mean, so many things impress us about Roseanne, but one of the things that really stands out for me is her persistence. So I think besides passion, persistence is a really important trait. And, you know, even, you know, getting the funding from Autism Speaks, finding the clinical practice at Children's Specialized Hospital, all of that, I mean, it wasn't just like, oh, here you go, smooth sailing, here's the money, here's the population. At every step, there was some obstacle. And, you know, I don't know, she's also Italian, I don't know if it's a Sicilian, but, you know, just don't take no, you don't have to be obnoxious, but don't take no for an answer so easily. And, you know, this is a little bit, I think, also something I think about a lot in our practice. I think as OTs and as a stereotype, we tend to be a little timid, and we, you know, tend to go along with what people tell us, and that's a good trait. But the other side of it is sometimes we just get run over, and good ideas don't proceed. So I think that's just another little take home. Be persistent. Don't always take no for an answer right off the bat. Look for other ways around. And even when after the Autism Speaks study was completed, it really looked like it might not get published. There were a lot of no's on the submission, and it took a lot of persistence to get that paper published. So just know that, you know, it's not an easy road, and you have to stick with it.
And you have to have really thick skin.
Yes.
Just can't take it personally. You know, it's not about you. It's about something that a reviewer read, and you have to try to figure out, what did that reviewer read that made them believe that this was not fundable or not publishable or not, and then try to fix that. So, I mean, things go in, submissions go in a million times, and it's really important to have thick skin. And I think working with people who have different perspectives is really hugely important as well. And if everybody knows the same thing, it's not a good team. And also, it's if everybody loves everything you do, that's not a good team either. You really have to have respect for one another, and believe when someone tells you this isn't good, that it probably isn't good. But it's not that you're not good, it's that this thing needs to be fixed somehow. And so I think the more you can look for people who work well with you, but who know something really different, really complementary, the better off you are.
I think you also have to keep your ego at bay. And part of the challenge is that we put so much time and energy and thought into writing a grant or writing a paper or developing a research question that it becomes part of you. And I know I find that I have to step away from things for an hour or a day or maybe a weekend, or I can go back to it and take the feedback objectively. So just, you get all wrapped up in it, and you need to be able to step back. And sometimes the right team can be instrumental to that.
And I think the word that keeps coming up is team. And the one thing that's probably been the most meaningful to me is to have people who can critique the work, you know, and people who you feel safe with, as you both described, that nobody should feel like they have to do that process alone, because, you know, it's, I don't know, maybe there are researchers who can, but I've always felt like the thing that's made me stronger and better and more thoughtful is the feedback from this group and the support also. I mean, persistence, I think, really thrives on the generosity of the people around that individual to know that what they're doing is being, you know, held up by others too. And that, I don't know, between the support and the encouragement and the feedback, I feel like those are the ingredients that make people more successful.
Yeah.
And when you get feedback that you don't like, you do have to go lick your wounds. I mean, you get a period of time in which you lick your wounds and you feel sorry for yourself, and you complain about the reviewers and the examiners, and then after that 20 minutes is over, or maybe a day or two is over, then you just have to go back to it and just get on with it.
Yeah.
I
think that I've learned so much from my colleagues. You know, it's like, well, you're working on a paper and you put all this time writing in a certain way, and then it goes off to the rest of the group and somebody changes what you've written and you're like, arr! But then you sit back and you're like, oh, but that's so much better the way that they worded that. And I feel like I've learned how to phrase things and to you know, word things that in ways that I never would, because it's just not my style. But because I've worked with all of you, I've had, you know, I've got that skill now, you know, and I think that's a really valuable part of being with the team well, is that you learn from each other, you grow.
Suzanne, I just have to say that one of the things that's missing from your litany of everything that has been accomplished is the Sensory Integration Theory and Practice 3rd edition book.
I'm sorry, I remembered that at the end, and I thought that was a big labor of love. I'm sorry, Shelley. I didn't
Oh,
mean
that's
to leave
okay.
that
I wanted to do a call out to Anita on that one, since she is the first author editor on that book.
You guys did an amazing job with that book.
Well, that was definitely a team effort.
I was
So
just going to say, we had an
that would
amazing
not have
team.
happened without everyone, and everyone here having contributed to it. And so it was a huge effort, which we are now passing to the next group of people to do. But it's been quite an experience. And honestly, I mean, Shelley and I work really well together. We've worked together for a really, really long time, but it is all about having complementary skills and respecting one another, and being able to say, I don't think so, or please fix this, will you, because I can't do it.
And just one other thought on the thick skin. If anyone has doubts, they should go back and read Love Jean and hear Dr. Ayres' experiences. I mean, if anyone had criticism and had to keep going in spite of being knocked down, it was definitely her.
It's a great read. Well, we have some questions and we have 5 more minutes.
Okay.
So yeah, it's bad, but we gotta go. But first of all, let me say that thank you so much, because being on this, I feel like probably every person in this room is thankful for hearing from you. Like we of course see you as leaders and examples to follow, and hearing, people like you saying that this is not hard and it was harder in the beginning, and I didn't want to do it, or I didn't think I was going to be a researcher. I think it's really inspiring for us, because we kind of feel the same right now. We're scared and we don't know where to go. So thank you for that humble words, and that means a lot. But we have some questions here, and one is from best research articles that you recommend for defending Ayres Sensory Integration. And maybe Dr. Smith-Rowley, maybe we can send some references on the replay email that we sent to the participants.
Sure, we can compile those. The big ones are the Shaw 2014 randomized clinical trial, the Schoen systematic review, the Frank Portogram Institute review. I mean, there's some big ones now. Anybody who's examining the research on sensory integration has to look in the last 10 years. If they're looking prior to that, they're out of date. So we've got some amazing articles now. Okay, what else?
But we'll make sure to get this to people. Thank you. And so other question that is very interesting, and maybe we'll sum up all of this, is that we often hear to talk about funds and grants and a lot of dollars going on this research programs. But some of us work or are from some countries that are poorer or don't have this research, possibilities like money and investment and funding. But I know that a lot of work that you do is actually not funded and volunteered and self-funded. So I want you to talk a little bit about that, because I think there's a lot to do even without funding and without money. And if you have any tips for people that are in these situations or they have limited resources, what would you say?
I would say it comes back to the question. If you have an answerable question and time and good colleagues, but always starting with the question, then I think you can, that's a good place to begin.
Well, we've self-funded almost everything. And we had conferences and had therapy socks and therapy Barbies and the proverbial bake sale to get enough money for the statistician. And SIRC is, there's no funding for SIRC. It's our play,
Funded.
but it's our time together that we enjoy, and it's self-supported. So, and then the grants are hard. The grants are hard. And I think you have to be very dedicated to writing a lot of grants and accepting the rejection, refining the grants and going back in. And that's where some of these smaller efforts, you know, the bake sale kind of things, like, okay, what do you need? We didn't have a fidelity tool. Okay, let's do that. And then, okay, now you can submit the larger grant. Funding is a big issue.
Yeah, but there's a lot to do
Right.
beside the grant, right? There's a lot of work to do that can be done
And
without a
also
grant.
then it comes back to this idea of a team. If you have a team, you start to open up more options. And so if you have a clinical team with university-based people, and then there maybe are some people who have grant options for you. But if you don't have funding, then start somewhere. I mean, when I think about a team, I think about the EASY, and we have 2,000 people volunteering to test children around the world. Sometimes, you have an idea. If it's a good idea, they will come. People will come and help and be interested and dedicated. So don't let that stop you. Money's overrated.
Sometimes in the short term, there's not much reward and financial reward, but in the long term, you have a big reward from this work. We are fully
And remember the clinical
And it takes
database that like
time.
Teresa was talking about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can
Yeah,
get a
it
lot of
takes
data
time.
from clinical. Yeah.
Yeah.
You did, Suzanne. You had a great study.
I got a whole wall
Just
of
from your
files.
assessment files. Yeah.
A
Yeah.
wall of files. Well, we've
I
got
think
to
it's
6 o'clock.
time. Well, it goes so fast every week.
Yes. It
Yeah.
surprises me.
I
Yeah.
know, but you
Oh,
guys are
wow.
just the best ever.
It's so
Everybody.
fun to see all of you. We miss you.
Well, thank you
Um,
so much for
But,
this.
but
I mean-
Suzanne, tell us what we're doing next week.
Well, next week we've
Exciting.
invited our friends in leadership, because I don't know if it's so clear to people watching, but we thought for the future, for June, it would be like looking to the future, because we thought, oh, things are going to open up. So the leadership and research, and next week it'll be leadership, professional leadership with Ginny Stoffel. She was a past AOTA president, and Debbie Heinerfeld, who I think she's on the AOT board of directors right now. She's held numerous leadership positions. She's just absolutely amazing human being, both of them. And we love them so much, and they're fun, and they're our good friends. So they're coming next week, again at 5 p.m.
That's actually another important point, is that having fun in the work really makes things get
It's essential.
done. And it then the money, who cares about the money? If you're having fun, it's a lot easier.
It works out.
And the
And the wine.
The wine
It
helps.
works out. Is it time for
Okay.
cheers?
It's time for cheers, and it's time
Cheers, everyone.
to say
Cheers and
stay
thank you.
positive,
We love
stay
you so much.
connected, and stay safe.
You did it again.
Yes.
Love you, everyone.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you. This was
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. It's our
Bye.
pleasure.
Nice to see
and that's
everybody.
the truth.
Great to see you all.
Besos.
Bye-bye. Thank you.